Good evening and welcome to Forge Debates, the General Election Edition. I'm Amy Charles. Tonight I'm joined by four political parties who are affiliated with the Students' Union. I'm joined by the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrat Party and the Green Party. We couldn't invite UKIP tonight because they do not have a society that are a part of the Students' Union. Tonight we'll take part in four sections, all 15 minutes each, and then we'll have a small break in between each one. We will have a opening section on education. We will then move on to health and social care, then immigration, the EU and defence, and finally a section on the economy and taxation. So why don't we go around the circle and introduce ourselves? Why don't we start here?
Hi there, I'm Harry Matthews. I'm the co-chair of the University of Sheffield Liberal Democrats, and I'm also a fourth-year physics student.
Hi, I'm Will Lockwood. I'm the chairman of the Conservative Future Party here at the University of Sheffield, and I'm a third-year history and politics student.
Hi, I'm Christy McMorrow. I'm co-chair of the Labour Student Society here, one of the two co-chairs. I also have to clarify, I've been told, that I speak in a personal capacity as part of the Labour Society and views don't reflect on position as President-elect of the Students' Union.
I'm Fraser Kerr. I'm president of the Young Green Society and I'm a second-year politics and philosophy student.
Thanks very much, guys. If you guys watching or listening at home would like to get involved on Twitter, use the hashtag #ForgeDebates, and yeah, get involved, get debating. And why don't we do the same? So let's start with education. Start with the big one, big guns. Tuition fees, £9,000. Will they be paid back? Let's start over here.
Well, I think obviously this is a difficult issue for the Liberal Democrats. I know that Nick has tried very hard to negotiate with our Conservative colleagues. Unfortunately, though, they were very much in favour of what the Brown Review, which was this big report that Labour commissioned in their dying days in 2010, which recommended unlimited fees. And unfortunately, in a situation like that, when both the Labour Party and the Tory Party wouldn't back the Liberal Democrat plan to get rid of tuition fees, you're in a situation when you only have 57 of the members of Parliament, that actually you've got to compromise. You've got to say, okay, we've got to make a deal here. We could have fallen on our sword, but that wouldn't have been a good plan for Britain. That would have actually made things worse. But actually, I'm quite proud of where we're at to now. We're getting, 10 years ago, it would have been 70% less likely for someone from a disadvantaged background to apply. Now, that's a really good record of achievement. That's happened because of Liberal Democrats in government, and the payback threshold, so when you start paying back your tuition fees, is also now £5,000 higher than it ever was under Labour. So I think, yes, I do appreciate the vitriol that Nick gets, but you know what, he's had the courage to apologise, and I think he should be commended for that.
Okay, my actual question was whether the £9,000 a year will be paid back. Do you honestly believe that they will be paid back?
Well, it's all about, so the system is all about, it's kind of a pseudo-graduate tax, so it all depends on how much you earn. The difficulty there is about, where you earn and how much you earn. And some people, if they never cross the threshold, they will never pay back any of their tuition fees, which is fine because actually, that's how the system works, that's how a graduate tax would work. So I think, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, it's not specifically answering this specific question, but I'd just like to counter something that Harry said at the start. My issue with the Lib Dems and tuition fees isn't so much to do with it was a manifesto pledge they couldn't go through on, they were part of a coalition. It's that the Lib Dems specifically said, we will vote against tuition fees. That's different to saying it's part of our manifesto, this is what we'd like to do, and we might not be able to do it in a coalition. A lot of specifically signed a pledge saying that they wouldn't vote for any raise in tuition fees, while in a back drawer in Lib Dem offices, there was a plan to know that they might happily go and raise tuition fees. I think that's my problem with it, but...
Well, it's funny when Christy talks about this because both in 1997 and 2001, the Labour Party said they first wouldn't introduce fees, and then they did. They said they wouldn't treble tuition fees, and then they did. But unlike the Liberal Democrats in 2010, they had a massive 100-seat majority. They could have easily done whatever they'd wanted, but they chose to break that pledge twice. They weren't in the difficult situation that Nick Clegg was in. And I think that's, however difficult it might be, and I do appreciate and I do understand it, it's slightly hypocritical, if I'm honest, to hear the Labour Party tell me that somehow they're holier than thou on this one.
Interesting. Well, why don't we throw over to the Green Party and their pledge to abolish tuition fees, cancel student debt, and in the future, abolish postgraduate tuition fees?
Well, this is quite a consistent theme you're going to have with the Green Party, is that we're essentially really the only future-orientated party. And obviously, when you invest in people's education, what you're really investing in is the future. So we don't think we should have tuition fees. We're one of there are 9 currently EU states that don't have tuition fees. Scotland don't have tuition fees. Why should English students be paying $9,000 a year for tuition fees? If you're like me and you're doing a 3-year course, at the end of that year, you're going to have $27,000 of debt just from tuition fees alone. And the Green Party, the only party which is promising to wipe out student debt if they are elected. So it seems like a really obvious choice which party you should be voting here for if you're a student.
Do you honestly believe that that's a feasible aim?
Yes, loads of countries in Europe don't have tuition fees, and paying off people's debt is essentially money that's owed to the government anyway. So it would just be money the government's writing off. You don't actually have to fund that cancelling of the debt.
Does anyone have anything to come back to that?
I'd just say there's no way that the Green Party would be able to fund writing off everyone's debts and cutting tuition fees. I mean, the Green Party manifesto is full of holes.
This is money that's owed to the government, so you're not having to pay.
So
to
it wouldn't
write
be,
it off.
it'd be money that wasn't paying down the national debt or the deficit as it's supposed to be when it comes back. I'd also say that, yes, it was regrettable that fees had to go up to £9,000, but to keep the top universities in the world in this country, we needed to have higher fees to make sure that we attracted the best talent in terms of lecturers and professors. And also that there's more people are actually coming to university now than they were in 2010. So tuition fees, yes, they are high and there is a lot of debt, but at the end of the day, you're getting a world-class education for that money. And if you think about it, foreign students are paying £30,000 a year, so you're essentially getting a £9,000 education for what is worth £30,000. So I don't necessarily disagree with the raising tuition fees. I mean, if I go on a personal note, I probably wouldn't have made it £9,000. I'd have probably had it slightly lower. But at the end of the day, with more people at university, we're having a higher skilled, higher educated workforce, and with more people coming, I don't see the problem with it currently.
I'm not going to lie. I can go on record and say I support free education. But I think the thing we need to be careful about now is, have people not heard before a new, supposedly more left-wing than Labour Party coming in and saying, we're going to abolish tuition fees? I think there's a certain angle in which we need to be aware that the Green Party know they're not going to be in government and can happily say whatever they want about this. A lot of these pledges that seem to be, I haven't seen much on how these are going to be funded. Frankly, I think there's lots of ways they can be, and Labour's pledge to reduce tuition fees to £6,000 isn't the end of a process, it's the start. There's a big campaign for free education within the Labour Party that's working on how to come about it in a long-term strategy, and there's a lot of Labour MPs here behind it. And I think basically it needs to be something that we're working on ambitiously with a strong plan for how we can achieve it.
But the problem with the Labour plan is that you lower it to £6,000, but how the system works, you just benefit the wealthiest. That's what Martin Lewis of MoneySavingExpert.com, very well-renowned person, said. He said it's financially illiterate.
Well, you want
so
to
the
look
Labour
at it.
plan, no, but the Labour plan doesn't succeed in progressive aims. It puts us back. It's regressive. It's regressive, isn't it?
It succeeds in some very important progressive aims. While we can say that, applications to university have gone up, I tell you what, when £9,000 fees came in, applications from mature and part-time students have gone down drastically. Those students aren't the privileged, wealthy students, and those are the students who the psychological barrier of £9,000 debt is extremely significant for. And only by at least starting to tackle the awful situation we have with the cost of tuition fees now, can we start to break down that psychological barrier?
I think it's pretty obvious if more people are going to uni after you've raised tuition fees to £9,000, that's despite of that, not because of it. I don't understand you keep linking somehow more disadvantaged students are going to university. I think you said applying to university, not actually going to university.
Well, I don't have the specific statistics, but it's definitely the applications have gone up. It was, I think last year, 495,000 people went to university last year. That's what we want. That's the direction we want to go. We want more people to get the skills so that they can help the economy. You can see, if you look at the UCAS figures, where it starts to turn. You have this dip in 2010 because the Labour Party decided to scaremonger and said, you won't be able to afford to go into university. Actually, it's now cheaper once you graduate if you're earning the same amount of money than you would have under Labour's system. So I think there's a clear link. When people look at the facts, when they look at the figures, they see what happens.
So you're not worried about mature and part-time students then?
I am. Well, we are going to have to look at these issues. You look at how at the last autumn statement, how we've introduced a postgraduate loan system, which doesn't tackle the exact issue, but I do want to look at that. I think that's something that you raised, which is very important.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on to something different in education because university isn't the be-all or end-all. Let's talk about schooling and talk about free schools and academies, which is something that's become much bigger under this last 5 years. And the Greens plan to bring all academies and free schools under the local authority control. I know that you guys over here want to expand that and carry it on. Any thoughts on schooling and policies around schooling?
I would just say that education is too fundamental a thing to be privatised and left to the interests of private companies. Finland have a system very similar to what we're proposing with all schools under local authority control, and they have one of the best education systems in the world. If we're looking for countries to aspire to, I think we should look across the North Sea to Scandinavian social democratic countries rather than systems like America, which is just essentially very much biased towards the rich.
I'd just say that over the last 5 years, that 1 million more school children are in either good or outstanding schools compared to between 2005 and 2010, which is a strong record, which shows that the Conservatives have got a good education record, and it will continue to grow if there is a Conservative government over the next 5 years.
Okay, well, there was actually a few weeks ago a document was leaked regarding that free schools would be fast-tracked help from the government, which would essentially save pre-election embarrassment. Do you believe that that's using education as political capital? Saving free schools, which was one of your biggest policies in the last election, to then to fast track it to avoid embarrassment in this election.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, if a school is failing, the government obviously has to step in and help it. And I think that the free school system is a relatively new system. It might take a bit of time to get off the ground, and if it requires governmental help, I suppose the government will have to stand in. But as free school develops and more people take interest, I'm sure that over the next 5 years that they will pick up and they will not need government intervention in the future.
Well, there's a statistic I know about free schools. I think it's about 2/3 of free schools are faith schools. Now, I don't know about the other people in this room, but that really worries me. I think the idea that our schooling should be focused in specifically religious ideals is a really concerning one. I'm from Derby, it's only about an hour down the road, and the free school we had in Derby had to be closed because it was teaching just fundamental religious ideas. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that was inevitable with free schools, and that's why the government's having to step in, not because it's a new project that hasn't got ironed out. It's because if you open it up to anyone to open a school, you're going to get fundamentalist groups doing that.
And what's worse, I think, about free schools is actually you get them in areas where they've already got good schooling and where they've got parents who have the time and the energy to set up their own school. I think actually we've got to look at how we help Sheffield schools. So, we've secured, I know that Nick secured £62 million worth for Sheffield schools through the pupil premium, which is this really good initiative about attaching money to schools in the most deprived areas. And I think that's something where Chrissy's actually touching on it. I think actually we've got to look at how we get schools all across the country, not just in the wealthy suburbs of London, wherever Toby Young wants to set up his next school. I think we've got to really look at those sorts of issues.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, and something that has been raised, definitely. Are free schools and academies realistically only for the benefits of the middle classes? Or are they something that can help everyone?
Well, I think there is a difference, I think, between free schools and academies. Yeah. I think free schools, certainly there is... I'm uneasy for many of the reasons that Christy's talked about, but academies I'm less so because actually they've become more of the norm. And I'm not particularly informed on whether they've been better or worse, but I personally haven't heard anything. My mum works in the education profession, so
Okay. Anything else you want to add about that?
I know relatively little about how specifically the academies work. All I do know is that a lot of staff in teachers' trade unions have said there's a lot of concerns about job security and how pay is balanced once you have academies with the ability to change pay structures more. That would be my number one concern, but free schools particularly are something that I think has to be a concern. I don't think that they can really advantage outside of the middle classes because, frankly, if you're having to work 2-3 jobs to feed your family, you're not going to also be taking on volunteering running the school. And I think, frankly, that's a clear issue. It's going to be those who have the time and money to be able to afford to get involved in running schools that will be able to do it.
Yeah, I think free schools and academy and private schools as well kind of just challenge the idea that Britain is a meritocracy where people based on their abilities and where they end up. Obviously, if you can go to a better school when you're younger, you're obviously going to have a better education and end up with better life results. And That's just not the principles Britain's meant to be based on.
Do you think that's a fair comment?
Well, I'm not going to sit here and defend private schools because, I didn't go to one. I went to a state school. But when it comes to academy and free schools, I think, they do very well. Despite the fact we've had stronger and more frequent Ofsted inspections of them. So we know the million people who are at good and outstanding schools, they are actually at good and outstanding schools. And, I believe in the Conservative education policy. I think Nicky Morgan's doing a good job, and I'd like to see it continue post-election and like to see a Conservative majority.
So why won't you commit to protecting the education budget from cradle to college then? Why
we have committed
No,
to
you haven't. You've committed by
education.
inflation, but not by pupil numbers. Why won't you do that?
I think it'd be useful to not speak in terms that people wouldn't understand. What do you mean by cradle to college?
So I mean from early years education, so from 2 to 19-year-old to 19, so that would include, I think, further education. So why won't the Conservatives commit to that? Why are you leaving the door open to cuts to education?
I can't tell you why they're doing that. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I'm not here to protect every single Conservative policy there is. But what I'm telling you is that for me, having 1 million more students, 1 million more children in good and outstanding schools is a record to be proud of. And that will only expand if the Conservatives are in government next time. And, I say, I'm not here to defend every single Conservative education policy. I'm an open-minded young man. And that's it,
Fantastic. Well, that's actually all we've got time for in the education section. I'm just going to throw over to our pundit section now, where and we'll be back in just a moment for a section on health and social care. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. We are here joined by Johnny Park and Aidan Leap, here to talk to you about the education policies. So, guys, what do you make of the education policies?
I think, the first bit of the debate there was about university education, and that's a massive part of this election, especially for the students who'll be watching this. But I think there's a big problem, no one's making a radical change. I don't think now that you've seen tuition fees introduced, that what the Greens are suggesting, that you can scrap them all, will work. I don't think also people will want the £9,000. Obviously, you don't want that massive burden coming out of university. And then people see Labour's as a middle ground and go, well, that's not doing us anything either. It's only reducing that burden by a bit. So I think none of the policies, especially on tuition fees, are really saying much to students at the moment.
Yeah, do you have anything to say on that?
I think I agree. A big part of this election is the universities, especially after the U-turn following the last election. So I think people are really going to be scrutinising it. And I do agree. I feel like it looks like Labour are just going for a middle ground, whereas the Greens are obviously attempting to abolish it, but then there are questions about where the money would come from. And then there's the £9,000, which a lot of students aren't happy with, despite figures that there are more students in universities. People are clearly not happy with it. So, yeah, I think there is work to be done. But.
Yeah, I think tuition fees is obviously a very big, very relevant part of our lives, and that's why it's talked about so much. But do you think that the politicians and the parties are trying to talk about tuition fees so that they can catch our vote almost, because it's so relevant to us?
There's definitely been a big sway, especially in this election, where you're seeing the politicians trying to pick up the youth vote. You keep on seeing stats that it was really sorely missed in the 2010 election, that the youth vote could really change this election, because we know how close it's going to be. So they're trying to make policies that interest people, obviously, but I don't know if just talking about universities is going to get the electorate out, because I think it's more nuanced than that, and voters like us don't just care about how much we're paying for university fees. Obviously, it's a very important point, but there's not much else for young people in the manifestos. They're thinking that will be the catch-on that will work for them.
Yeah, I think looking at Labour's £6,000, I do think it looks like a bit of a middle ground that they're trying to find. And I do think that, for me, it kind of seems like a bit of a compromise and a bit of an attempt to win the student vote. And I also question where that money's going to come from, because I've seen that they're going to take a lot of it out of cutting the tax on pension income and stuff. But yeah, they also say it's going to come out of clamping down on tax avoidance, and I think that's quite a washy area to say they're going to be getting money from. So I'd like to see more more of where the money is going to be coming from on that one. But yeah.
The problem with that is everyone's scared of losing this election, and no one wants to say exactly where they're going to get the money from. So they're playing it safe. It's saying something like tax avoidance again is one that's going to win a lot of votes, but you don't know if it's actually where that money's going to come from. So it's another one of those sort of catchwords that's been used a lot in this general election.
Yeah, I guess we'll only be able to see after the election if the parties will be able to follow through on these policies that they have promised, and I guess it will depend on who gets elected, what the coalition or lack of coalition looks like, and so definitely going to be all to play for after Thursday. So that's great. It's good to hear your points there. And now back to Amy for the next topic.
Welcome back to our viewers at home. This next 15 minutes will be based on health and social care policies. And again, we're going to start with probably the biggest thing that's come out in this whole health debate over the general election, which is the Conservative £8 billion that they'd like to add to the health budget. Now, actually, a lot of this attacking has gone on to the Conservatives, but it's actually also in the Liberal Democrat manifesto to add £8 billion to the health manifesto, the health budget, sorry.
So the Liberal Democrats, we were the first party. So where this £8 billion, actually, let's talk about that. So the chief executive of NHS England, he's a guy called Simon Stevens. He wrote a report for, I think, probably the government last November, saying that by 2020, the NHS needs an £8 billion extra to do everything that it needs to do. So what Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats said was, OK, we'll find the money for it. And that's what we've done. The Conservatives then, I think, getting a little bit worried about the polls and how they were still neck and neck with Labour, decided, oh, yeah, we'll do that too. But unlike the Liberal Democrats, where we've clearly set out where we're going to fund this £8 billion, the Conservatives have just kind of committed to it and not really said anything about it.
So where is this money going to come from then?
So it's going to come from things like tightening up pension relief and then also, increasing the dividend tax, as well as a few other things, as well as once we've cleared the structural deficit by April 2018, we'll be able to increase the health budget in line with economic growth. So that's how we're going to fund that £8 billion.
Sounds good. Sorry, do you want to talk about your £8 billion promise?
Yeah.
Not your personal one, but the one of the Conservative
I
Party.
wish I personally had £8 billion to give to the NHS. I would if I could. But with the Conservatives, you get I'm going to use the word, long-term economic plan. We'll all be here. Pleased I got that in. And that means that we'll have paid down the deficit by 2017. Now, when the deficit is down, we'll have the money to put into the NHS, which it needs. And with our long-term economic plan, the projections are that we will be able to spend £8 billion extra between 2015 and 2020 on the NHS, and that's how we're going to fund it.
Well, I'd like to respond first by saying, as Harry put it, £8 billion is what we need to keep the NHS at the standards it's currently at. I don't think that's good enough. I think the NHS needs to be able to step up to the demands that we currently have. I think currently a lot of what's happened with the Health and Social Reform Act is things that have actually had a really negative effect on lots of sections of the NHS. That's why Labour have promised £12.5 billion investment in the NHS, which is over 50% more than either Conservatives or the Lib Dems, and have costed it. Most of it's come from a mansion tax on properties over £2 million. It's all been costed, and that's been to the IFS and come back and said it's properly costed.
I'd just like to say, according to the Labour Party manifesto, you'll be spending £2.5 billion extra a year on top of whatever the Conservatives pledge. So that actually makes £20.5 billion. So where are you going to find the rest of it?
Well, I presume that as the manifestos came out at the same time, the Conservatives' last-minute £8 billion pledge was a change that probably hadn't been accounted for. I don't think you can blame Labour for the Tories suddenly throwing a last-minute desperate pitch out.
Why is your manifesto so dependent on other people's manifestos, though? Isn't that silly?
Well, I don't know if you've seen any Liberal Democrat adverts, look left, look right, then cross. I mean, that's pretty dependent on other parties. I think what they're saying is that Labour are more committed to investing in the NHS than the Conservatives, and that's true.
Okay, well, why don't we talk about Labour's investment in the NHS then? You've promised 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs and 3,000 more midwives. Where are these people going to come from?
Well, there have been people who've been made unemployed from cuts to the NHS. I think a lot of people would like
20,000?
I don't know if it's 20,000. Like, my job isn't to be the health secretary for the Labour Party, but I do know there's been people who've made unemployed. Some of those people will want to come back into work. There are also people, many people want to train to be nurses. There are always huge demand for nursing and medical places at universities. Obviously, that takes time for them to come into the workforce, but that's also people. And even more on top of that, the NHS is admired as a health system around the world. Lots of people from other countries who are very highly skilled would love to work in the NHS, and that's why I'm very proud to, I know UKIP aren't here, but say immigration does great things for our NHS. And
Talk about immigration later. Let's not double cross the paths.
Well, the Green Party want to spend an extra £12 billion a year on the NHS, which they're hoping will create a total of around 400,000 jobs. But I think the key thing the Green Party want to do is actually reverse the privatisation which has taken place in the NHS. This was begun under New Labour with private finance initiatives and has been continued by the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition with the Healthcare and Social Act, which the Green Party want to repeal. We're the only party which have promised to reserve the privatisation which has taken place so far in the NHS, despite Labour making it one of their key issues.
That's not quite true. I mean, Labour have promised to repeal the Health and Social Care Act, which has seen huge privatisation out in the NHS. Most of the things Labour would be keeping under private companies are things like the catering or the cleaning in hospitals. And obviously those are very important things that need to be regulated very well. But actually, in a time when the NHS is having quite a funding crisis, if we're supporting businesses that are cleaning and catering, I don't think those are the biggest issues you need to focus on.
Well, I think the real problem is, why should voters trust you to protect the NHS from further privatisation when you were the one who started the privatisation process?
Well, Labour has changed a lot in the last 5 years. Ed Miliband is not Tony Blair, that's very clear. And also, I mean, why should Labour be trusted with the NHS? NHS standards consistently rise under Labour governments. Labour is the party of the NHS. It's supported by workers in the NHS. Yeah, I would personally think Labour is the party of the NHS and largely has the support of its workers. And I think the workers in the NHS know what's best for it, and they tend to support Labour. Well,
the Green Party want a dedicated NHS tax to go directly to the funding of the NHS. They're also the only party which wants to abolish prescription charges, and the only party which wants to legalise medical marijuana. These three people have to defend their ridiculous party positions, saying that medical marijuana should be illegal, and sick people, such as people undergoing chemotherapy, shouldn't be allowed to smoke weed.
That's not quite true. So in government, we've commissioned a report into drug reform across the world, which has started the debate on the war on drugs. You can see Richard Branson backing the Liberal Democrats when it talks about drug reform. He doesn't back the Green Party; he backs the Lib Dems. We've been very clear and very passionate about actually let's have evidence-based drugs policy in the UK. I know this isn't quite to do with health.
That's fine.
So I think kind of sort of saying, oh, the three of them, they're all the same. It's not actually true if you've read our manifesto.
And actually, saying we have to defend these positions of our parties, I mean, I think we're all here as representatives, but parties are broad churches. Everyone knows that people disagree with the party leadership on some things. And while we're on health, okay, I disagree. I think medical marijuana should be legal. The Labour Party don't. Natalie Bennett says that homeopathy has a place in the NHS. Oh. Are you going to defend that?
No.
Fantastic. So while we're talking, we've sort of moved on a little bit from health, so I'll just carry on with that. The Liberal Democrats and the Green Party have both put in your manifestos that you'd like to introduce a minimum pricing on alcohol. Surely, do you not believe that there are better ways of tackling addiction and social problems around alcohol than stigmatising those who buy it?
Addiction's very much a problem due to inequality.
Okay.
There's actually a nice book called The Spirit Level, Why Equality is Better for Everyone, and they compared results from 23 of the world's richest countries, and they found in loads of social figures, including drug addiction problems, that addiction's almost always higher in more unequal societies.
Yeah, but that's not kind of what I was asking.
That's what I view as the root cause of drug addiction. So the Green Party want to essentially take a health-based approach to drug addiction rather than criminalising drug users. We would scrap criminal offences for personal use of drugs.
Okay, let's talk about the minimum pricing on alcohol. So I believe in the Green Party manifesto it's 50 pence per unit. Do you not think that that's making it difficult for those who do have an addiction to get hold of alcohol, and if they were in poor circumstances, and then they might resort to other stealing or other ways of getting hold of it? Do you not think that that's a more pressing issue and there are better ways of dealing with this as an issue?
Well, I think the best way of dealing with it would be to treat it as a health-based issue. although minimum pricing on alcohol might have some positive effects, I haven't looked into it that much, to be honest, but...
I feel mean jumping on again, but since I don't think Labour do support minimum pricing on alcohol...
It's not in your manifesto.
And it's not in our manifesto for sure, and Labour would support a health-based approach on that, so I'm glad we...
Well, why don't we talk about the Liberal Democrat?
Well, I think probably, I think, I don't want to speak for Will, but I think probably everyone around this table would support a health-based approach on alcohol addiction. I'm
Yes.
not, yeah, I think I can, yeah, good. I thought that's, I wasn't actually aware that it was our party policy, to be honest. I'm actually not that much in favour of it. I haven't really read any evidence for it or against it. I know
in the manifesto it states that they will consider it looking at the success in Scotland. So it's not we will bring it in.
Way of looking at the evidence.
It's look at the evidence, see if it works, and then.
Yes,
so it's a maybe.
No, I thought that's
it's
probably
a maybe.
where we were. That's probably where my answer was going to go. We would look at the evidence because I think that's how you've got to make policy on these sorts of issues, where actually it's not very ideological. Actually, you just want to help people get better. You don't need to be ideological about it. So yeah, I think we need to look at what happens in Scotland and see where that takes us.
Okay. And in every single one of your manifestos, you talk about tackling mental health. How do you propose to tackle, this is an open question to everyone, how do you propose to tackle the quite pressing issue in the UK and, a lot of it's focused on England, but on the issue of mental health and mental health care?
Well, if I'm going to very short anecdote, I'm the child of 2 mental health nurses. Those are the things that have enshrined in me how important our NHS is. And I've seen under this government, both of my parents say how slashed mental health funding has been, how they've seen people taking on 3 jobs just to try and drive around the whole of Derbyshire trying to talk to people who have mental health issues in the community. And that's just not where our mental health services should be. So it's in the Labour manifesto to equalise funding per heads or per people in need in mental health and physical health. And I think that's exactly the kind of direction we need to go in, so that we're not looking at them as different things, but they are both parts of our health service.
Well, you'll be very glad to hear that we've already legislated for that. So that parity is already there in law. Obviously, there's probably going to be some wriggles in sorting it out, obviously. But, we've also, it's because of the Liberal Democrats that we've introduced the first waiting time targets for mental health services, which I'm sure Christy will know all about. And the Liberal Democrats, we've also committed as part of this £8 billion, £500 million extra for mental health services, which is on top of everything else.
I think it's worth pointing out that mental illness is one of those factors which is also higher in more unequal societies. So obviously Britain, being one of the most unequal societies in Europe, has slightly higher rates of mental health problems than certain other societies. Mental illness currently accounts for 28% of illnesses, but only 13% of NHS spending. And the Greens kind of want to put mental health as one of their priorities in dealing with the NHS in order to try and compensate and rectify that problem.
Okay, and so how are you proposing to move forward with that? It's all well and good saying we will prioritise that, but what does that mean? Does that mean building new wards? Does that mean training people as psychiatrists and psychiatric nurses? What's behind the rhetoric?
I'm not too sure of the specifics, but I assume extra £12 billion a year that we're pumping into the NHS. I assume some of those 400,000 jobs would be psychiatrists, mental health professionals, and care workers and social workers.
Fantastic.
It's not often I agree with Labour or the Lib Dems, but personally for me, I think mental health should be in line with physical health also. I think it's one of those things which there's a lot of stigma around it, and it's not something people will often come forwards and talk about. Mm-hmm. But I certainly personally believe that it should be something that is better funded so people with mental health can get the help they need.
Fantastic. And the final thing I just wanted to talk about is a little bit to do with what we're going to be speaking about at the end, which is the Transatlantic Trade Partnership, Trade and Industry Partnership, TTIP. Everyone says they want to protect the NHS from TTIP. How do you think that you're going to be able to do that?
Well, Labour have been working very hard within the Socialists and Democrats group inside the EU for at least to have a clause to take the NHS out of the TTIP. It's not a solved issue whether Labour are going to support TTIP at all yet. Broadly, the centre-left grouping in the EU has been undecided on the issue. I'm personally against it, but if it's going to pass, it's vital that our NHS has a buyout clause, essentially. Mm-hmm.
Christy, I'm going to be able to make you happy yet again. So the Nick Clegg wrote to the commissioner, Commissioner Malmström, I think is her name. She's the European Commissioner, so she's the person from the European Union who's negotiating this deal on behalf of all of us. And she's written back and saying, yeah, actually, we're going to protect public health services. They're not under risk. That's it. Full
Is
stop.
that for certain?
Yeah, it's in the letter. It's in a letter that's been published on the government's website, and so that's open in the air, so everyone can see it. Everyone knows that commitment's there. So that's it.
Well, I'm happy to stray off the party line and say, personally, I just think we should vote down TTIP from any other issues, in the fact that it'll make it very difficult for us to nationalise things when we might need to or want to as a country. Those like. A TTIP deal gives businesses a power the state doesn't have almost. If business could sue if we tried to nationalise the railways. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And I know that the Greens will come in and...
Do.
Greens are the only party opposed to TTIP. Did we talk about what the TTIP is?
We're going to talk about it a bit more in the economy.
Okay, well, Greens are unequivocally opposed to TTIP, so that's how we'd protect the NHS from it.
Okay, well, fantastic. I think we'll wrap it up for health now over here. If you want to get involved, please do use the hashtag #ForgeDebates on Twitter, and we'll just throw over to our punditry corner now.
Thank you, Amy. Hi again. We're now joined by Charlie and Hugh, who are here to talk about the health policies and the social care policies as well. So there was a lot of talk about mental health over there. I think it's quite a big issue of the general election. But do you guys think that the parties will actually be able to follow through on their mental health pledges?
I think there's definitely the political will there to discuss mental health in a way that we haven't seen before. Certainly this was brought up at the Lib Dem conference back in, I think it was November, and from then on there's been a big discussion about mental health. But what none of the parties are actually talking about is the way that mental health problems are caused. There's not really any discussion of prevention. It's a lot more about cure. And we've got to look at some of the facts of modern society as to why we're seeing such a sudden prevalence of mental health issues.
Yeah, well, they all four candidate or debatees there agreed that something needs to be done about it, and people are talking about how it can be changed, but at the same time, people aren't really learning about it. So is it going to be continuously, like you were saying, continuously happening over the next 20 years of people still suffering from mental health problems and things aren't changing? So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a lot needs to be done. And my next question is, do you think we can afford, I know there's a lot of cuts and talk of cuts happening in the NHS, but do you think we can afford to sort of push mental health as this big issue?
Well, Labour, as Christy said, are the party of the NHS, so I suppose that would be their biggest sort of spend. So maybe where else are they going to be cutting it from? Is because if you're trying to reduce, like Labour want to do with the education fees as well, trying to bring them down, so that means government spending up. I'm not sure.
I'm sure they'll get on to exactly where the money's coming from in the section about the economy that's coming up shortly. There are a few ideas, such as the Green Party looking to legalise cannabis with it as a possible tax generator, and there's definitely money to be generated there if that's the path that the country wants to go down.
Yeah, well, there's some great points there. Really great, interesting discussion. And now we'll go back over to Amy for our next question.
Welcome back. We are now in... sorry, one moment. Welcome back. We're in the third section, the immigration, EU and defence section of our debate. So I'm just going to start with an open question to everyone. British population is steadily going down. We need a 2.1 population growth in order to sustain the population as is. Surely immigration is necessary to keep the public services as they are at the moment, let alone improve them.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I already said that was the case
Yeah,
for the NHS.
Well, 11% of all NHS staff at the moment are immigrants.
Well, definitely, we can have even more if we have those 20,000 nurses.
Yeah, and the Philippines is the biggest export of nurses to the NHS at the moment. So capping immigration, I know that in the Tory manifesto it says they want to cap it at 20,700 non-EU immigrants per year. Is that something that is conducive to successful public services?
I suppose, like personally, I don't actually have a problem with immigration. Really.
I'm not accusing you of having a problem with immigrants or immigration.
The cap's there to try and ease people's worries about Britain becoming overcrowded.
Where do you think these worries come from?
I'll tell you where they come from. So having talked to people on the doorstep about it, it comes from when you have infrastructure that's not suitable for when you have new communities there. You know what? A lot of these worries are based in real things. It's about hospitals, it's about schools, it's about roads, it's about their house price. Those are things that are real issues. But actually, it's not immigration that's the cause of those. It's actually a lack of building new homes that we want to do. So Lib Dems, we're committed to building 300.
Okay, let's stick to immigration. Let's stick to immigration.
It's a really key issue, actually, because we have a lack of housing in this country. So therefore, you get issues when it comes to housing benefit or council housing with immigrants who come to this country perfectly legally. So I think there's actually, it's not actually about the net number of people who come to this country. It's actually about the infrastructure and how you deal with people coming to here and how your hospitals, how your schools.
Okay, let's just carry on with your point that why the Tory cap, why is it there?
Yeah, the cap is there to allay people's fears that Britain is becoming overcrowded. We can't afford the NHS anymore. We can't afford public services, and we can't control immigration from within the EU, so we're trying to control it from outside the EU. And I think, you talk to people on the doorstep, and when I talk to people on the doorstep, immigration tends to be their number one issue. And you can tell it's a massive issue with people in the country because of the rise of UKIP. It looks like UKIP are going to get 10, 11, maybe 12, 13% of the vote at the election. And those votes are based on people's fears about immigration. So I suppose the cap is to try and allay those fears, to show that allay those fears that we're having too many people are coming over here. But my personal opinion is that immigration is a good thing. It helps our public services and it helps our public sector. And I possibly wouldn't have a cap on it personally, but that's the Conservative Party policy it's to try and allay people's fears of immigration.
Okay.
The Greens are the only party, I think, which don't want a cap on immigration. If someone wants to challenge that? No?
I don't think Labour have a specific cap.
I'm pretty
certain there isn't.
Yeah, no, we're not in favour of a cap either.
I think it makes me quite proud that less than a third of 18 to 24-year-olds think immigration is one of the central issues concerning Britain today. I think, unlike the reasons you've given, most people have quite a fear of immigration because it's shoved down their throats by right-wing media, and it kind of serves a useful political narrative to blame the kind of poor and scapegoat them, rather than blaming the powerful for how our society is.
I think I absolutely agree that is why immigration is a problem. But I think, and not to go on another one about the Greens, and it's true of the Lib Dems as well, when you're a party who gains a lot of your support from middle-class graduates and students, you don't hear, immigration isn't the issue that most of your voters are talking about. And I certainly know from a lot of Labour voters I've talked to who say immigration is the number one issue, it's because it's been shoved down their throat. But you can't just ignore those voters. We can't say this isn't an issue. And that's why Labour are pledging to do things that don't just scapegoat immigrants, but they do help tackle those issues by saying we're going to strengthen the minimum wage because some businesses are hiring workers from outside the EU and paying them far too little, but there are also wages that if you have your whole family in Britain, you can't afford to take. Labour also want to make sure that the businesses can't just advertise jobs to those outside of the country. That's plainly unfair. And those are the kind of things that will allay people's fears about immigration without actually putting some cap on how many immigrants come into the country.
Okay, fantastic. Well, why don't we just talk about at the University of Sheffield, we're one of the only students' unions that have an international students officer, one of three, and we also have, I would say, one of the best places for international students to come. A number of manifestos have mentioned the change of the international student visa. I know that the Greens want to allow international students to stay in the UK and work for 2 years after they graduate. I know that the Conservatives want to reform that. There's no further explanation as to how or what they're going to do with the reform. But international students, and let's talk about them.
It's currently 6 months. I'm not exactly sure how long a foreign student can stay in the country, but I certainly think it should be at least a year for them to be able to try and get a job. Because at the end of the day, they're coming to an excellent university like the University of Sheffield. They're getting a world-class education. And we want those people to come and work in our jobs. We want them to be our engineers. Because if we're training them, we're making them the best graduates they can be. Surely we want to benefit from the skills we've given them. So if I get a phone call from policy team, that's what I'll be trying to explain to them. I'll be trying to get them to make it at least a year. And I'd also go on to, if we talk about immigration, that students are counted in the immigration figures, and I believe that's because of it's an EU directive that they have to be counted in your immigration figures, and I'd be for that, for foreign students being taken out of immigration figures.
Is that in a personal capacity?
That's in a personal capacity. I don't know what the party line is on that, I'm afraid.
Fantastic. Anyone else?
I think, as far as I'm aware, that actually the postgraduate study work visa was longer under the Labour government and it's been taken back now. But also, more importantly, I understand the idea of taking international students out of immigration figures, but it's not something I'd really want to push for, because I don't like this idea that these are the good migrants that are coming and getting an education, that these are the bad ones that are sponging off our public services. I think we need to get into a more grown-up discourse about immigration, where we can say, no, we're not going to take them out of the figures, because immigration generally is quite good for our country.
It's true. It's what study after study has found. Immigrants make a positive contribution to the UK economy.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's talk about the in-out referendum of the EU. Should we be having one?
We should have one. We should have
no,
one.
No, I'm going for
No, it's all right.
So we should agree here.
Pardon?
We're going to agree here, aren't we?
I think we probably are. We should have one when there is a treaty change. So that's what we've already legislated for. I think possibly my favourite piece of legislation is the European Union Act 2011. It's something that David Cameron signed up for and then got a little bit worried about Nigel Farage and thought, oh, maybe I've got to go a bit tougher.
So why do you think that we should have a referendum if there's a treaty change?
Because I think it's important that people actually do have their say when there is going to be a big exchange of powers. I think that's important that people, and there is obviously concern about the relationship that we have with Europe, and I think actually for too long, politicians have tried to weasel out of it. You could just remember about the Lisbon referendum, where we wanted an in-and-out referendum, but the Tories wanted it specifically on the Lisbon Treaty. Actually, let's just put it to bed. When there is a treaty change, let's have the referendum. Let's have it done. Let's not have the instability, though, of saying, oh, we're going to have a referendum in 3 years' time or 2 years' time or whenever David Cameron decides this morning. And putting businesses at risk. There are 4 million jobs attached to the European Union.
Would you like to come in and
I would like to come in, yeah. I think, the EU is, again, one of the major issues this country has. You speak to people on the doorstep, they want an in-out referendum. Currently, the polls are split almost 50-50 between the people who want to stay in the EU and the people who want to go out of the EU. We haven't had a referendum on the EU since the 60s. At the end of the day, people like David Cameron, people like Ed Miliband, people like Nick Clegg have not had their say via a referendum on whether we should be in the EU or not. I'm completely for a referendum in 2017, but I believe we need the renegotiation I believe David Cameron can deliver for this country before we decide whether we can stay in or out. And I think, personally, we need to let Britain decide whether we remain in the EU or whether we leave. And I think we should trust the people whether we should be in or out. And I believe in democracy, and that's why I believe in an in-out referendum.
Okay, let's hear from over here. Let's hear from over here.
I believe in democracy. If referendums define what democracy is, then we should have them for every single issue, rather than just having a representative democracy. You're standing here supporting the Conservative Party. That means you believe that the Conservative Party have some policies that people can vote for as a set of things. If people vote for the Labour Party, they're voting for a party that says no referendum unless there's a major transfer of powers. They know that. That's not undemocratic. Secondly...
But surely that's also what the Liberal Democrats, if they vote for the Liberal Democrats,
but
that's what the Liberal Democrats
that is also true with the Liberal Democrats.
You can say it, Christy. You can say you agree with me. It's okay.
Do you agree with Ed? Because that's good. But no, more importantly, it's also, if we're going to have a renegotiation of powers, in my view, they have to be the exact opposite renegotiation of powers to what the Conservatives want. I don't want us to go back to being a common market. I think a lot of the market stuff that goes on in the EU is actually to the detriment of our society. It means that we become further and further away from a society that can run our own...
well, over 50% of our exports go into the EU.
No, that's not my problem that I'm calling for. I think having agreements that mean we can have freedom of movement and things like that are very important. But also some of these things mean that our country can't democratically choose to have state-run industries. And I don't think that's democratic at all. I think that's the antithesis of democracy. And I think the things we need to keep are the particular things that many Tories rail against, which is enshrining human rights, workers' rights. Those are the important things that the EU gives us.
Okay, well, I know that the Greens are also for a referendum?
The Greens are for an EU referendum, but for quite a different reason than UKIP and the Conservatives. It is essentially because we haven't had a referendum in the last 40 years or so, and the Green Party are so much more in favour of direct democracy than any of the parties here. We're talking about local referendums. The Green Party think you should be able to initiate constitutional referendums, so people can have a certain number of signatures, it starts or triggers a referendum, and then people can directly decide what they want to do. We do want a reform of EU to hand back power to local communities and a referendum on EU's membership. But the thing is, it probably would result in the EU staying in. The polling numbers have been much more in support of the EU, partly because of UKIP. So many people are opposed to UKIP that they now see the EU as a positive thing. So we shouldn't really particularly worried about a debate and a referendum on the EU.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I just want to talk a little bit about defence. A lot of people have very strong opinions on Trident. I know that the Green Party would want to completely abolish Trident, and there are different policies within each party about it. But in reality, Trident is 5% of the MOD's budget. Is it really the biggest issue that we have with our defence spending at the moment?
No, it's not. So I come from an armed forces background. My dad served for 30 years. I'll tell you what the biggest priority is about armed forces housing. You look at the state of quarters for the men and women who serve in armed forces is actually appalling. And I think actually that's a much bigger issue than how we deal with the issues, the geopolitical issues. On Trident, though, I think it is important to come back to this. The world has changed. It's not the Cold War anymore. I don't think we need a nuclear deterrent anymore. You see,
in a personal capacity.
I think what we want to do is we'd want to scale it back. It's really about the decommissioning costs as well as the recommissioning costs. So there's a balance to be had, but I think actually we want to be scaling back because actually a nuclear deterrent is not the best utilisation of resources for how we defend our country.
So that 5% could be better spent, for example, in quarters of where people are living. Anyone else want to agree?
Well, I think it's obvious that any kind of weapon you have, which if you use is going to be a crime against humanity, just shouldn't be something that Britain as a democratic liberal country should have. I think the Green Party's main focus would be a new international agreement on climate change. Obviously, we need to push for lower CO2 emission targets. I don't know if any of the people sat here know how much the effects of ocean acidification are, but it's essentially going to increase by about 150% by the end of this century.
Okay, well, let's just stick to the spending.
Well, that has a huge foreign implication because it's essentially going to wipe out a lot of calcium-based life on the seas, which is going to devastate fishing populations, and it's going to be a huge problem.
On Trident, I want to kind of clarify the way the Labour Party works in this. What everyone will hear is Ed Miliband supports Trident nuclear deterrent. That's true. But it's one of those issues in which it's not a solved issue in the Labour Party. If anyone wants to look at the left platform of the Labour Party, there's a group of 30 to 40 likely MPs after the next Parliament who have pledged to vote down any renewal of Trident. That's a very substantial grouping in Parliament. There's a substantial grouping...
Well, it's not just about renewing Trident, it's about keeping it up and paying to have it and to...
Isn't that the same thing?
Well,
pretty much is.
Yeah. It's about buying... I know that the Conservative Party want to buy more.
I think what's interesting about Trident, actually, is when the Tories talk about, Labour, SNP, they're working together. So, should the Conservatives, if there's a vote on Trident, which there will be in 2016, will the Tories vote with Labour to keep Trident then?
Well, why would they? Well, it'd be more Labour voting with the Conservatives because it'd be a Conservative-led government. But, Trident, I believe... In the current situation we've got with growing Russian aggression, Trident is a vital thing for the armed force and a vital thing for the country. And I would hope, and I know that any Conservative government or any Conservative opposition will be voting in favour of keeping the Trident nuclear defences.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions to the immigration, EU and defence debate. That's what I'm looking for. So we're just going to throw over to our punditry corner where they'll carry on the discussion, and we'll be back for economy, welfare and taxation.
Thank you, Amy. I'm now joined by Jack and Josh here to discuss the EU, immigration and defence. So my first question is, I know there's loads of talk about EU membership and referendum or no referendum, but do you think the public actually really care if we're in the EU or if we're not in the EU?
Well, I think it's obvious now with the rise of UKIP and things like that it is a big issue for a lot of people. And the rhetoric's kind of changed from a few years ago where it was people just defending the EU and putting down UKIP and their claims about immigration causing problems. And it's now changed to addressing why people have worries about immigration and things.
Yeah, I think it is important, but it's only important because people have been misled. So like the media likes to spread lies about the EU and immigration. And remember when Bulgarians and Romanians were allowed to come here, they were predicting tsunamis of immigrants and barely anybody came. So I think people have just been misled, and that's maybe why they care more.
Yeah, sort of the point that I was trying to make, that I sort of think the public, although they see the EU as important, they don't entirely understand it. They don't know what the benefits are, what the negatives are of joining the EU. So, yeah, is there anything you want to expand on that?
People like say, do you think we should be in the EU? A yes or no choice, but you can do an entire degree just in European Union studies. So to boil it down to a yes or no question makes it very simplistic when it's a very complex issue, really.
And I'd like to go on because I think also people often describe the EU as undemocratic and things like that. That shows it's not. It works like a parliament does in any other country in the world. The problem is that we've disenfranchised ourselves from it by falling out and being quite obtuse in how we deal with the EU. I think that's led to problems that give people a misconception of the EU.
Yeah, and it's sort of quite related to the issue of immigration, which was talked about briefly over there. But do you think that sort of the topic of asylum seekers has been ignored from the sort of rhetoric of immigration?
I think asylum seekers has been ignored by all apart from, I believe it's the Greens, UKIP and Plaid Cymru are the only ones who really feature asylum seekers. The other three parties have to look in, really don't have much. I don't know if you have found anything on asylum seekers.
After you brought it up earlier that we were going to be talking about it, I sat down and thought, I think it's just because none of them know what to do about it or what to say about it. I think it's just an avoidance.
Maybe they don't want to be branded. If you go anti-asylum seeker, people go, oh, you're racist and stigmatise you, whereas if you say, oh yeah, we're pro for it, people say, oh, you're going to allow anybody here.
Yeah. But it's sort of the statistics on the amount of asylum seekers we allow in, it's sort of, personally, I feel that it should be more of a topic talked about, but I guess because immigration's such a hot topic at the moment, parties may not want to commit to sort of allowing more in or saying that they don't want to allow more in. Definitely. I guess it's just quite a complicated issue.
Yeah, it's just a thin line for the parties to tread, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And my final quick question is, do you think that there should be more talk about sort of defence policies other than Trident, which I know has been sort of quite a big issue in the election?
Yeah, I really think there should be, because as mentioned, like Trident is 5 to 6% of defence spending. We've still got aircraft carriers and submarines and ships and armed forces and planes, which nobody seems to talk about or mention. And given we're one of the largest armed forces in the world, do you think it would be some sort of issue?
Yeah, that's a great point there. So thank you for your topics, for your points. They're really interesting. And now we'll go back to Amy for the final topic.
Welcome back to our final segment of the Forge Debates General Election Special. Don't forget, if you want to get involved, you can use the hashtag Forge Debates on Twitter. And we're going into our final section, which is based on the economy, welfare and taxation. The big one, I'd say. So let's start with, we're in Northern City, in Sheffield. How are we going to, in the future, create jobs outside of London and create more jobs in areas like Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester, further north?
The Conservative have the Northern Powerhouse Plan, which involves HS2 and HS3, creating strong links between, in HS3, Liverpool and Hull, which comes through Sheffield, and HS2 from London to York and Leeds, which also comes through Sheffield. I'd personally say I feel Sheffield has been let down by its MPs. They haven't fought hard enough for funding for Sheffield. Whilst Manchester profits from the Northern Powerhouse funding the Conservatives are giving out, Sheffield has floundered somewhat, despite the fact the Deputy Prime Minister is the MP in the local area. So I'd say the Conservatives are wanting to create, for every one job that is created in London, 3 jobs will be created in the north. Over the course of the last Parliament, we've got 2 million more people employed. 80% of them are on full-time contracts. And if there is a Conservative government after Thursday, I suppose, it's pretty close now, things like that will continue. The Northern Powerhouse funding will continue, and hopefully Sheffield, if there's a Conservative MP, will push harder for the funding.
Would you like to defend the Liberal Democrat?
Well, I think...
sorry. We can also then talk about the Labour MPs as well, but let's just...
Yeah, I think there's a slight sort of mistruth in that one. About certainly when it comes to sort of city deals and devolution deals, stuff that Nick's fought very hard on, which is about giving the council more powers. It does rely on the council to show a little bit of leadership in something that's, have some ambition for the city. It's things like IKEA, which the Labour Council tried to block for several years, and spend £60,000 on an inquest just to stop jobs being created. This council is not exactly the most ambitious for Sheffield, and I think it's a little bit unfair to blame Nick for everything that comes Sheffield's way.
So first of all, we're hearing a criticism of local Labour MPs, which we have way more than Nick Clegg, just to clarify, and then the local Labour Council. I tell you what's really hit jobs in this city is the fact that council cuts to northern cities and poorer cities are hugely disproportionate under this government to those from wealthy places. So this Sheffield City Council has seen huge swathe of cuts. Surrey County Council, 3% increase in funding. A Labour promise under the next government will be to make sure that poorer council areas will have their funding increased to make sure that they can invest in the local area.
But Ed Miliband's already said in this election campaign he's going to cut local government funding by £500 million. Where are you going to find that? He's going to be
cutting it out of those places that you've been giving loads of money to.
But Sheffield gets £400 more ahead than Windsor and Maidenhead. So you're going to just cut Windsor and Maidenhead to the bone. What about the poor people in Windsor and Maidenhead? What have they ever done to you? Is it because they don't vote Labour, or what is it?
I have no idea where you're going off on that one. I don't think there was anything in my statement that suggested I want to put no money into the local councils.
Well, you've got to cut if you're going to increase funding for northern cities. If you're going to increase funding for northern cities, you're going to have to cut it from somewhere. If you're going to find this £500 million.
I hadn't heard the local government's half cut in funding, and I don't know where you've got that from, but
it's from an interview back in April.
Okay.
Greens?
Greens are the only party here which want to end austerity. I know my Labour friend here is quite left-wing and seems to quite favour a lot of the Green Party views, but the Green Party want to increase public spending by around 20%. We essentially pay for this with a levy of new taxes, mainly on the very wealthy. But we're hoping this will create over 1 million living wage jobs. A living wage job is where our minimum wage is £10 an hour, or at least by the end of 2020, that's what we hope for, because that's the wage people need to essentially earn a basic living.
Well, let's talk about the living wage. Let's talk about the rising in the minimum wage.
Well, Labour have promised to raise it to £8, but actually, if we're talking about... I don't think it's enough, but also...
Well, Greens £8.10, it's not that much more.
But the Conservatives are £8.06 an hour.
But I want to clarify that there are other things that will make low-paid jobs much better off under Labour than they would be under a Green government. Labour have promised to reintroduce the 10% tax rate, so have the Greens. Labour want to start it at £10,000 so that you pay no tax on that first £10,000 of income. That's vitally important. The Greens, it starts at zero. Paying tax when you're earning pittance. That's the difference between a Labour and a Green.
Yeah, but if you look over here...
The tax threshold is currently at £10,600. It's going to rise next year. So basically, you're going to say to those people who are earning, say, £10,100 per annum, oh, you're going to be taxed again after we just took them out of tax.
Well, they're going to be taxed again. They're going to be taxed 10% on the £100. The first £10,000
the point is, if it's more progressive to raise the national insurance threshold, the income tax threshold, than just increasing bureaucracy by increasing another tax rate.
Hey,
well, the Conservatives are promising to cut taxes on anyone earning minimum wage by 2020, so rising it to £12,500 by 2020.
Well, I think what we can say is when you get the people who would be in the 20% band are now in the 10% band, they're going to be very happy about it. I think what is striking about this is that we're having this conversation about taking people out of tax, while the Green Party, supposedly the left-wing party, the one who want to tax people 10% on the first £10,000 of their income. That's shocking.
People wouldn't be earning £10,000 a year with the living wage, hopefully. Hopefully they'll be earning a wage they can live on. But I think the key issue here is the effect TTIP would have on jobs, which is predicted to lose hundreds of thousands of jobs across Europe and the UK, devastate British industries. Do you have any comment on that? And do you have any comment on the fact that 2/3 of economists said that the coalition austerity measures harm the UA economy rather than helping them? From either of you two?
Well, coming back on the coalition harming the economy, I'd just come back and say the UK is now the strongest growing country in the G8.
Thanks to your policies.
Well, it clearly is, because
two-thirds of polled economists said that your
at the end of the day, if we look at the
economy.
EU, which hasn't gone with the UK style of sort of government over the last 5
The
years.
EU hasn't gone with austerity over the last 5 years.
Well, France has gone without austerity over the last 5 years, and if you look at the French, they've gone into a triple dip recession. And I'm sorry to attack you here, Christy, but Ed Miliband said he agreed with Francois Hollande's policies in 2012. You know, at the end of the day, things have been tough over the past 5 years. Absolutely, I'm not going to sit here and say it's all fine and dandy, but we've got a growing economy. We've got more people employed than ever before, and wages are going up, inflation is down. This government has a very strong record on the economy, and if a Conservative government is elected, it will continue. And unfortunately, I believe that if the Labour Party or a Labour coalition with whoever they go in with will wreck the economy. And it's basically out there. The IMF have said, not the IMF, I can't remember who it was, but £170 billion more debt if a Labour government is brought in after 2015.
Okay, let's move on to the policies of non-dom outlawing and corporate tax avoidance, general tax avoidance. Is non-dom outlawing possible and feasible? And is the big tax avoidance, the ones that are actually costing the UK huge amounts of money, is closing those loopholes possible?
Well, one thing that's got to be really important, and I think it's probably one of the biggest assets we can have from working within the EU, is we have to work with other countries and to make sure that they're chasing up our non-dom taxpayers in their countries and we're chasing them up in ours. If we sit and isolate ourselves on our own, all of the businesses are going to be happy to have their offshore accounts all the time because there'd be nothing we can do about it. And frankly, that's the way we tackle it. It's not going to be simple, but frankly, it can be as complex as anything, and it doesn't mean like we should stop, because even if it's ridiculously complex, the fact that there are people who should be paying their fair share in society who aren't is just not good enough. We should work as hard as we can to stop it.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think Christy's right. It's got tax avoidance. That's why we have agreements with the Channel Islands and Switzerland, as well as some other countries and territories about this issue. And I think Christy hits the nail on the head. You've got to do this through international agreements, because actually, if you're a big business, you're not gonna be too het up about if you just have to stay in Britain, or you'll move somewhere else. You see what Amazon have done with moving their headquarters to Luxembourg. That was for various reasons, I'm sure. But we've got to do this through international means. That's why the Conservatives plan to have an in-out referendum, in 2017, is putting so much at risk.
Anyone else? We could talk about the. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'd just say that Labour's Shadow Chancellor said that actually stopping non-doms would cost more money than it would actually bring in. I mean,
your leader disagreed.
Your leader disagreed, but who's going to be in charge of the Treasury if Labour get in? It's going to be Ed Balls. But obviously,
Ed Miliband as the leader of the party can have some say over what Ed Balls does in the Chancellor.
Well, anyway, what I was just going to say is that obviously no one can defend tax avoiders. We'd like to clamp down on non-doms. We'd like to clamp down on companies. You can see through this government that we have worked hard to get tax avoiders, and it's in the manifesto that we will track aggressive tax avoiders and make sure we take as much revenue from them as possible.
I think you have to have a pretty optimistic view of the political parties when you think the same parties that are funded by tax avoiders are also going to crack down on tax avoidance, focusing that particularly at the Conservatives, to be fair. I think one of the Green Party policies, which is also very good, is a Robin Hood tax on financial transactions. It's a very small tax on essentially currency conversions and all the different financial transactions. It's estimated to raise about $20 billion a year.
Yeah, it is a good idea, but the problem with it is you've got to do it through international means. It comes back to this thing. We're taking on vested interest, sure, good idea, great, fully behind it, but these people are clever. They're in the position they are, not because they're stupid, but actually because they can outsmart a lot of people. You've got to tackle it, as a more cohesive, more international way, rather than just putting a tax on and just thinking that's going to solve the problem. It's not.
I think if we're going to just bring in specific taxes that parties support that will help lower the deficit, actually, I think one that's Labour, which we can do within this country, is a banker's bonus tax is a really important policy of the Labour Party. They've not been properly clamped down on that. The bankers are getting richer and richer after causing a financial crisis. And I think, actually, that's something that really resonates with people, that bankers should be paying their fair share. Same applies with the mansion tax, and also removing key allowances for the very wealthiest pensioners. I think those are the kind of ways we can make money without making cuts for the state.
I'm pretty sure all of those are policies supported by the Green Party. I know
They're also
definitely
policies of the Labour Party, though.
I know.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking part in this debate. I think we're going to now do a quick summary for each party. So each party member is going to do a very short closing statement. So we're going to start over here and move around. We'll start with the Green Party. So, Fraser, go.
You might have clocked that the Green Party have a lot of policies which the other parties don't. Sometimes their manifestos can all seem essentially the same. That one. The Green Party want to end austerity. They're the only party which is in favour of this. They're the only party which wants democratic referendums initiated in the House of Lords. And they're the only party which wants to commit to a zero-carbon future. At the moment, all these other parties are centred on the ideology of cancer cells. Growth, 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 even at the cost of killing the host. This is where the Green Party disagrees. This is why the Green Party is a futuristic party, and it's why the Green Party should get your vote. They're the only party which is centred around the future. And in Sheffield Central, the Greens have a good chance of winning. It's between them and Labour, and with your support, the Greens could do it.
Fantastic. Labour?
Well, I want to bring this back to local issues. This isn't one election that decides who runs the government. Your MP isn't just a blob on a swingometer. Your MP is the person who represents you. In Sheffield, I believe we have the best and the worst MPs for students. In Sheffield Central, we have Paul Blomfield, recognised by The Guardian as outstanding leader in education. He's worked to represent students all of his working life, and he's now an MP who does that in Parliament. Paul will be a fine asset to students, but most importantly, those who live in Sheffield Hallam. The Liberal Democrat Party let you down. They've lost a lot of young people's faith in politics by saying they'll do one thing and doing another. Oliver Coppard is a committed local man who's committed to working for the local area and not just sitting in Westminster. If you vote for Labour, you're voting for MPs that will represent you, not London.
Thank you very much. Conservative?
I'd like to say, if you vote Conservative, you vote for a long-term economic plan. You vote for the future of this country. You vote for a society where our children aren't paying down our debts. A vote for the Conservatives on the 7th of May is a vote for Britain. It's a vote that means our society will be stronger, there'll be more jobs, and the economy will flourish. If you vote Conservative on the 7th of May, we will continue down the road of economic prosperity. I'd just like to hope and will you all to vote Conservative anywhere you are in Sheffield, because with your vote, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, the Liberal Democrat Party.
So the Liberal Democrats, we stand for making a stronger economy and a fairer society, enabling opportunity for everyone. Whether that's an 8 billion extra for the NHS or parity with physical and mental health, or whether it's introducing 5 green laws to secure our future. It's tough, but also balancing the books fairly, not borrowing 70 billion too much like Labour would, or cutting 50 billion too much like the Conservatives would. So if you want a moderate, open-hearted government, you need to vote Liberal Democrat on the 7th of May.
Thank you very much to everyone who's joined me tonight and everyone who's been watching at home. I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you for watching.